the song you just heard is a sneak peek at Sage Courageous's new song titled Lockdown Rumble. It has not yet been released, and as the title indicates, the song was written shortly after the quarantine began last year, and it hits on some of the themes I will be discussing with my guest for this next episode. Definitely touches on themes of anxiety, stress, and uncertainty, which are all topics my guests and I will discuss at some point during this hour and a half. As always, thank you to Sage Courageous for allowing me to use your creative space as my creative space. And everyone, please go ahead and give their music a listen on your choice of streaming platform. What's up, everybody? Thank you all for tuning in to another week of Let's Talk Elephants. This episode is actually going to mark the halfway point for my second season, which is totally crazy to me because I feel like we just started back up not that long ago. So on to the topic for this week's episode. I will be interviewing Dre Smith, who has a bachelor's degree in psychology and has been working full-time with youth in residential treatment centers since 2013. He's a registered behavior tech and has worked with both adults and youth with disabilities and mental health impairments. Dre is also planning on starting his master's degree program in August in educational psychology to become a high school counselor. So with all of these said qualifications and field experience, Dre and I will actually be homing in on some more specific areas of mental health, in particular the mental health in the Black male and youth communities. So Dre, I know I just basically did a little introduction for you, but could you just briefly introduce yourself and give a little summary of the experiences you've had over the years working in these different facilities and different environments?
I appreciate you having me, by the way. I'm from Atlanta. I was born in California. And so I moved when we were like 4. So I kind of got back to the West Coast back in 2012 after getting my associate's degree at Copiah Lincoln. So as far as me living in southern Utah, it's a little bit different. So there's a university there called Dixie State, and that's where I got my bachelor's from. And so when I first got there, I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do as far as for part-time job and stuff like that. And so my whole vision going into college was I wanted to be a teacher. So didn't know what subject, just kind of know I wanted to help people. So I wasn't able to work at the youth center until I turned 21. So the minute I turned 21, I applied, and that was kind of it. And so from there, just working with youth in the independent living program. They were 18. So the facility that I worked at was called Red Rock. And so they had a younger side, and then they had the older side where I worked. So from there was different experiences that I learned, the good and the bad. So, of course, when you're working with youth, not only are you trying to teach them stuff, but they're also teaching you things as well. So from there, working with youth at a detention center in Salt Lake, where you're getting kids from different backgrounds, for kids that don't even live in this country, that just happen to kind of get to, the United States and end up in the system. So from there, worked there for 11 months. And then after that, worked with severe girls unit down in St. George. And that program, it kind of gave me a lot of experience when it came to severe mental health issues. And so, just kind of wanted to continue on that path. And so from there, started working in the community it's still with the state of Utah, but it's street outreach, and it's called Team Raw. And it's to educate and motivate the ready and willing. So being out in the community, not only educating the youth, but helping families in need, and just kind of things of that sort. So from there, I just kind of figured, you're more on a counselor path instead of a teacher path. So that's why I decided to go and get my master's. And so that's the path that I'm on.
Yeah. I kind of briefly mentioned this in my last episode because she also did work with people who were in, emotionally trying circumstances. I was explaining to her, like, I hate seeing people hurt. It's really hard for me because I absorb a lot of that. So has this taken, like, a toll on you, like, seeing some of this stuff? Like, is it hard for you to put a boundary up between, like, your mental health and their mental health, or is it like rewarding for you because you feel like you're improving their situation?
I think it's a combination of both. Not only, I mean, you have the bad, you have kids that struggle with various reasons, and in facilities like that, you have to go hands on with certain situations. From that standpoint, you're like, well, I don't want to have to go hands on with youth, of course, but that's just part of the job description. Or they'll come in with certain, stories of why they're here or whatever that may be. So not only some of the stuff that they bring in I've never experienced, it's something that I can put into my toolbox. So, well, hey, you came in from, learning about, not learning about, but just experiencing this type of what do you call it? More of a experience. And so when kids, especially kids that come in from violence and drug abuse and stuff like that, it's kind of hard to necessarily try to fill in their shoes. Oh, I've been there. Oh, I understand that.
You haven't been there?
I haven't been there. And so in order for me to be able to connect, I have to sit down and listen to their story, And that's, one thing about being a counselor, you have to sit there and listen. Oh, you might have heard the story before, but it's not the same story. My story is different from your story and vice versa. So when youth come in with, stories that, about family and things like that, you have to, corral them and be able to not only give your experience, but try to teach them a little bit more.
Right.
For me, I work in the education system right now, and I'll have my students come in, well, they have a C or a D, and they're like, well, how can I get this A or whatever? For me, I was never a 4.0 A student, maybe even a B student. I wasn't even that. So for me to sit there and say, well, yeah, I can teach you how to get a 4.0. I can't teach you how, but I can give you ways and options in order for you to be better with your grades. And so just learning different tools on how to help youth is, the main thing that I try to give back. And, being in the field for so long, it does take a toll on you. And if, some people say, well, you're at work and when you leave, that's the end of it. No, because when you're working in the community and things like that, you start to connect more with these kids, and some stuff you take home, and that's just the reality of it, and that's where mental health, as far as taking care of yourself outside of work, is one thing that will help others be better in that line of work.
Right. What you said that you kind of went in with a plan to become a teacher and that you've had this desire to help people. What does that stem from? Is it like a personal experience, or did you just sort of like try different things out in school and you were like, oh, I like this one the most, or have you always known like this is what I want to do?
It's a funny story. I was in my junior year of high school in a small town of Mississippi in Wesson. We had to take a state test in different subjects, but when I got there my junior year, we only had to take the social studies. And so didn't know much about it, the test wise. So as we were, planning to take this test in a few weeks, of course I studied a little bit, and then come to take the test, I get my score back and it was really high. So I'm like, well, I want to help people. I thought about being a teacher because, I like to be around sports and that aspect. So I got to be able to be around the school system. So thought about that. Well, maybe I can be a social studies teacher. And so from there, it was kind of like maybe that's where you should go because you obviously know a lot about the subject. Then why not? So when I got to Dixie, they didn't have the major that I was wanting to go into, so I had to do psychology and communications, integrated studies.
Okay.
So then after that, about 2 semesters after I got there, they had a social science composite with teaching. So that's what I started to do, and it evolved history, psychology, a little bit of economics, and various other different subjects. So I had to learn about sociology. I mean, I didn't think I was going to learn about that when I'm learning about just social studies or
Right.
economics. So that was when I thought about, well, is this really where I want to go? And so I think me being able to experience working in the facility with the youth, that was where I needed to be.
Mm-hmm. Have you personally struggled with mental health at all throughout your life, or is it more like you were saying that basically some of these kids are coming in with these stories and these experiences that you just have never had, so you have to listen to them and like basically sympathize rather than empathize with them. And it's mental health is something that's become, I feel like, more of like a hot button topic lately, you know what I mean? Or it's more important, it's more accentuated in like our generation. But still, not everybody struggles with, like, everybody has bad mental health days as a human, but not everybody struggles with anxiety. Not everybody struggles with depression. I feel like it's something that the words have kind of been beat up and they're overused a lot. So some people, there's a difference between having normal, healthy, and, well, not necessarily healthy, just normal anxiety as a response to a certain stimuli or a certain situation, and then a disorder. Like, there's a difference between those things. You know what I mean? So, like, major depressive disorder is not the same thing as being depressed one day, or, a generalized anxiety disorder is not the same as being anxious or nervous because you have to go give a speech or go to an audition or, some kind of tryout. So, not everybody struggles with those things. Is that something that you are familiar with, those things, or is that another area where you kind of just have to listen to them and see what that feels like?
Um, I like that you said that, it's more prevalent now. And I think as far as mental health, it's always been here. It's just broadcasted a little bit more that we can all see. And just to answer your question, I've struggled. Not necessarily with things that I've seen with the youth that come into the facilities, but just in everyday life. Didn't grow up with my father, so that can be part of a mental health thing. Um, Single mom. Looking at that and figuring out, well, how can I help? Well, was it my fault? Or whatever the case may be. And so you learn different things about that, about love. I mean, if you're not around, um, you know, certain situations where you see people hug all the time or you see healthy relationships, that's going to take a burden on you when it's time for you to get that relationship. And so, as far as for my mental health, I've always kind of been the person that I did everything on my own. Like I said before, my mom was a single mom. I lived with an older brother and an older sister. So for me, all I had was football. And so I had to figure out, okay, well, how can I get to where I need to go by using what I have? We didn't have the most money. So I would always think, well, dang, well, I can't get this, I can't get that. How's that going to make me feel if I'm going into a school and you know how it was back in those days when you're in high school, everybody wanted to bag on you. So it's like, I got to be tougher with that, because not only could that hurt me mentally if I'm not mentally strong, but it's part of growing up. And so I think nowadays it's more of we and I'm gonna say it is from my experience. Sometimes I think we kind of cradle a little bit too much when it comes to our youth, to learning to figure things out. When we always come to their aid 100% of the time, then they start to be dependent on that. And so for me, as far as, mental health, I struggle when it comes to, everyday living. So what am I going to do next week? Or what am I going to do today? Or how am I going to pay this bill? Or whatever the case may be. So as far as, living stress-free, I don't think you can ever necessarily live stress-free. There's always going to be something in the back of your mind that you're going to struggle with, whether it's anxiety, depression, or whatever. And so as you get older, you might not have had that experience or downfall when it came to mental health, but it just could come with age. I mean, we see it all the time with parents that all their kids are going out the house. And that can be part of that depression because you've always had that for those certain amount of years. So, yeah, lately, I've actually started therapy back in December. Okay. And for me to be able to kind of know I can handle everything on my own and not necessarily always struggling with mental health, I needed somebody to talk to outside of family.
Right.
Just to sit in and, hey, well, I want to learn this. Well, I'm struggling with this a little bit, but how can I get around this? And so I actually shared with my therapist a couple weeks ago just about how can I be more affectionate. I didn't have dad around. Mom was working most of the time, and I wasn't around healthy relationships when it came to loving somebody else. So I have 2 boys at home. So as far as for me loving them, I know what that looks like. It's automatic. Right. But when it comes to a significant other, that might be a little bit harder because I don't necessarily know what that looks like. And so that's why with certain things that I need help with, and that's just part of me building, my mental health resume, I would say. So
right. People don't realize, I'm thinking about doing a whole episode on this because people don't realize how their relationships or lack thereof with their parents is going to translate into every single area of their life. You know what I mean? Those are the 2 first relationships you ever have as a human being. You know what I mean? Like you come into the world and it's your mom, your dad, maybe just one of them, maybe neither of them. You know what I mean? So those shape so much of who we become, whether we have parents or not. And it has so much to do, you have your degree in psychology, so I'm sure you're very aware, but, with the attachment styles, with, was your parent securely attached? Was your parent insecurely attached? And there's so much that gets passed down through, like, generational trauma, too. So it's like, who's going to be the one to break the cycle? You know what I mean? Because if your mom went through something and her mom went through something and their mom went through something, like it just continues to get passed down, and somebody's got to be the one to be like, something doesn't feel right here. You know what I mean? Like how you're saying about how it's hard for you to be affectionate. I'm the same way. So it's very difficult for me to be touchy-feely with people, anybody. You know what I mean? I've gotten better about it as I've gotten older and read some books and figured some stuff out. But, I didn't really grow up in a super affectionate home either. So even if it was just like in middle school, girls are like, oh, they want to hold hands, or like we're going to hug or stuff like that. And that always made me uncomfortable. Like it was a natural response in my body where I was like, ooh, like something feels weird. Like this doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? So if I'm like that with my friends, it's really hard for me to be affectionate in my romantic relationships. You know what I mean? And that's such a big part of that. Regardless of how you grew up, there's all this science on oxytocin and pheromones and things that happen to your brain when you just share physical touch with somebody. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's, a little bit of a tangent there, but for sure that's like such a big part of like mental health is your relationship with your parents. So I know that you had initially told me you wanted to come on here and sort of discuss the issue of mental health specifically in the black male community. So, from your experience, both as a black male and as a healthcare worker, do you feel like there are some problems that you've run into regarding mental health in the black male community, like some common themes that you see, some stigmas, stereotypes, stuff like that? Like, what are the biggest things, your biggest issues with those two topics?
Um, I think the biggest thing as far as, growing up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So, like I said before, I didn't have dad around. So, I had an older brother, and it's, what do you do as far as daily life, I would say, other than school or whatever other extracurricular activity you got. So running the street. And so what are those things that you're seeing or those things that you're hearing from certain things that go on? And it's, when kids fall down, or boys per se, you know, before it used to be, hey, stop crying, get up, you're all right. And so I think growing up, it was always that you got to be a little tougher mentality just because I didn't have dad around. And so I think nowadays with black men, it's a sign of weakness if you're going to therapy, or if you're breaking down to whoever, or you're showing vulnerability. I don't think that how it should be, because everybody struggles with something. I mean, yeah, you're gonna have times when you need to be that tough guy, or you need to be that sincere guy. So I just think, as far as growing up in a black community, we have to all have, for one, love for each other. I mean, we go back and forth about BLM and everything that was going on in the past with presidency and all that. If we don't have love in our own community amongst our own color or ethnicity, whatever the case may be, how can we sit and say BLM and all that when everything else is happening right here in our community?
Right.
You have drugs, you have everything else that's going on, when we all have to have some type of connectivity or love for each other. Yeah, I've seen the gangs. I've seen, people get shot at or whatever the case may be. That's not going to be my final story. And as far as for black men, it's not easy. You have to be able to work to where you need to go. We all know there's white privilege, and that's just something that we have to live with. So breaking that stigma of not being good enough, um, or being, I guess you would say, too tough, that's not who I am. Mm-hmm. And so I just finished a book, actually, Common's book, Let Love Have the Last Word. So not only was he talking about him and his daughter's relationship, it was just everything that you do involves love, no matter what it is. We're here on this podcast. You have to know you have love for what you have going on. I work with youth. I have to have love for that. So for me, for black men especially, health is another big thing. I'm about to turn 30 and I'm worried about cholesterol level and whatever the case may be, when I'm supposed to, because when you turn 50 or 45, you're supposed to start getting these extra tests done. But I've heard that black men don't necessarily want to go down those avenues because of that stigma, not only necessarily for mental health, but just health in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable subject because every man has their own sexuality as far as how they feel comfortable. Whether it's going to a doctor to get blood drawn or a colonoscopy. Some people, black men especially, will not go do those things and would rather die of that cancer or those heart problems because of that stigma of I'll be all right. When in turn you don't necessarily know that. So
Yeah. What would you say that's rooted in? Because, so my next question is going to be about how you think the history of African Americans in general, because we were just talking about generational trauma and stuff like that, how the history of, your people affects that culture. Do you think that is tied into this mentality of you got to suck it up, you're going to be fine because it's been a survivor instinct, a survivor mentality for so long? Or does it have to do with, is it having to do with like living in urban communities and there being gang violence and drugs and, so keep that question in mind. But really quickly, have you heard of, I'm sure, again, psychology, of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So it's basically, you have the very bottom of the triangle, you have your basic shit like water, food, shelter, so that you don't die. You know what I mean? Like you need those things. And then as you move up the triangle, it's like a pyramid. You have different layers. So you'll have like once you get those things, then you might have like job security, income, and then after that you might have self-esteem and relationships, and then at the very top you have self-actualization, which is basically becoming the highest version of yourself that you possibly can. But you can't get there. You can't take care of yourself if you feel like you don't have food or water. You know what I mean? If you don't have food or water, you're not thinking about sex. You're not thinking about what other people think of you. You're not thinking about, I feel depressed right now. You're literally thinking about, I'm hungry. I need water. I need somewhere to sleep tonight. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I think of, how the Black community is disproportionately affected by those things. They struggle with the bottom rung of like the very basic needs of humanity. So in my head, it's like, how can you expect people to focus on their mental health if those needs aren't being met? You know what I mean? So do you feel like those conditions and the history of everything plays a role in like the stigma around mental health for Black males?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that poverty is it doesn't have a color.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so, of course, in any community where there's lack of food, water, shelter, whatever, you learn how to hustle, per se. So not only are you trying to figure out how can I help myself or how can I help family or whatever the case may be, and that's when we go to those avenues of robbing or selling drugs or whatever the case may be. So I think with that, when you're trying to make a dollar out of 15 cents, you're not thinking about mental health. You're thinking about how am I going to put clothes on my back? How am I going to put food in my stomach? And so I think in poverty-stricken areas, that's the thing. And so I was blessed to not have to go, days without food or shelter, even though we didn't have the most money and we had to bounce around from living in our apartment back to grandma's house and vice versa. So I think for me, I didn't necessarily have to go down that avenue, so I had a two-way street. Yeah, I could have chose to go left, but I went right. And so I think if you see that more in more urban communities, kids in the system. Well, wow. Well, What does mom and dad do? Is mom and dad around? If that's the case, what do you think they're observating on a daily basis? So when they don't have that necessarily that guidance, or they lack certain things, like you said, at the bottom of the triangle, then the rest of it doesn't matter until they have what's needed at that point. So it's going to forever happen because we all know we're always going to live in poverty some way, somehow. So I just think that, most people are going to live with what they can and just do the best they can, you know. Some people will utilize their tools more than others when they don't have much at all, and some will, I guess you would say, fold just because they're not used to that pressure, or they've been held under that pressure for so long that they snap. So I think, I guess, the totality of circumstance with certain things, that could be divorce, it can be loss of a job, loss of a loved one, anything. And then I might just tell you, I don't like your shoes today. And then you just snap. Because of everything else that I got going on in my life, I can only hold so much. The straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm. What about like the like slavery in our country and stuff? Do you feel like, obviously it's had an impact on Black culture, you know what I mean? Which the perspective of mental health in the Black community is a part of Black culture. So how do you feel like the history in the country has affected the mentality on mental health in the Black community?
I'm liking, with shows and podcasts with Black male athletes, and they're giving their perspective on certain things that they went through in their careers and things like that. So with, and I don't I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but you have to learn to be, I guess, open. And so if you don't necessarily sorry, I'm
No worries.
I don't want to.
You don't have to be hesitant to say anything. Like, that's the whole point of this. You know what I mean? Like, no matter what your opinion on any issue is, right? That's based on your lived experience and what you've been through, and nobody can take that from you. You know what I mean? So,
I guess so. A few years ago, probably 3, 4, I had to learn myself to educate myself on Juneteenth. For a lot of people, they didn't even know what that was 2 years ago until it was, the whole George Floyd thing and all the BLM stuff. Everything started to be more spoken about. And so when you ask that question, did slavery have a part in that with how it is in the Black community today? Of course. When you think about how long ago slavery ended, it hasn't been that long. And so there's a lot of people that still have that mindset. And then there's some that go above and beyond. So when people use their platform for whatever reason, I can respect that. So when people say, oh, you need to, I guess, dribble and shut up, that's their platform. Don't matter color, race. If you want to say something that's useful and you want to get your voice heard on whatever issue, fine by me. There was a NFL player a few weeks ago that came out as being openly gay. He using this platform to say what he wanted to say so that he can be more open about himself. I have no problem with it. So, yeah, I think as far as slavery, it has something to do with the way African Americans live right now. Because like you said, those generations are passed down and passed down. And when are we going to break that cycle of living in those situations? And some people can't get out of those situations because of what they're dealt. And that's just a part of life. So, and I just think educating yourself about whatever subject, whatever topic, by all means do it. And I think knowledge is key when it comes to certain situations like you said, slavery and Juneteenth, and when did slavery actually end? There's a difference between the Emancipation Proclamation and everything else that happened up to that point. And so if you don't educate yourself on that, you won't get much out of it. And that's the same thing with, any poverty-stricken community. There's not enough education about the simple things, not math, science, technology. No, we're talking about mental health. We're talking about different loans. We're talking about different business. How do I start this? Or mortgages. There's not enough of that being taught in poverty-stricken areas.
Right.
And if I want to go learn about it, I have to go outside of that. It should be in every community, every high school. I should have the chance to learn about anything that is not in a normal curriculum.
Right. You don't even see that in, I went to school in a nice area, like a nice high school where a lot of people had money, and we didn't even learn about that stuff there. You know what I mean? So that is a whole other episode where you could talk about the issues in the American education system. You know what I mean? That is just, I could do 2 hours on that, on how little our education system has changed since it started in the 1700s. You know what I mean? But yeah, I definitely agree that we just, I guess because I grew up fortunate enough to be taken care of monetarily, and I didn't have to worry about, where I was going to eat or where I was going to sleep. I was able to kind of get that information myself. You know what I mean? I still don't think I should have to go find it myself. I think it should be provided to me by my education system. But, if you're in a poverty-stricken area and your education level is already subpar, you know what I mean? The quality of education that you're getting is subpar. How can you expect somebody to go out and teach themselves everything important about life like that? You know what I mean? So I get where you're coming from. What are some common issues that you see Black males struggling with? If there's any commonalities between them, do you see a lot of Black males?
Where I live at, there's not many, other than some of the guys that might be playing at the university, or some that just may be around town. And I actually ran into a fella at work at the state about a week ago. And he was from out of town. And so he had been in Utah for only 2 months. And you can already tell, he was bouncing around from, a shelter to back with bomb and back to shelter. And he was kind of over it. And so, talking with him, it was, I'm just trying to get back home, but there are certain situations in front of me that I can't do that. Well, if you want to go home, okay, well, do you have an ID? No. That's part of what's weighing you down, whether you're 15, 16, 17. Well, do you have a school ID? I don't go to school. That's 2 things right there. And so hearing that and seeing it more and more, because he was African American, and he was just like, I'm just trying to get back home. Well, what are you going to do when you get home? Oh, well, I'm going to make this, and how you going to do it? We ain't going to even get into that. And that's the mindset of, I understand the hustle, and I'm not knocking nobody hustling, doing it, whatever. But why can't we change that? Don't stop hustling, just change it. And that's a quote from my guy Bear that works with Team Raw, and it's, yeah, you can slang drugs in the street. You're good at what subject? Math. So why can't you use that mindset in a classroom?
Mhm.
Or, like you said, you're selling whatever. Why can't you work in sales, marketing? And just to flip how you're trying to hustle.
Mhm.
And so, and people laugh, you still see sometimes people selling their CDs on the street or whatever.
Mhm.
I can't knock their hustle because that's all they have right now. They might not have the means to put it on a SoundCloud or Apple Music or whatever so that everybody can hear it. They got to start somewhere. And so, I just think that the more we, you know, get educated on certain things and be more open to using our tools, we'd be all right.
Right. And I don't disagree at all with what you're saying. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to take away anybody's autonomy or anybody's responsibility to do things differently. Like, everybody wakes up in the morning with choices, with free will, with the ability to go route A or route B, or to turn left or to turn right. You know what I mean? That's within our capability. But at the same time, I feel like it's also about perspective. You know what I mean? Because I think I just had this conversation with my dad recently. Because we were talking about we got into like a conversation about like just America, and about, oh, America is so great because you can go out and be anything that you want to be, right? Which I guess the opportunities are there, but so I gave him the example of myself. I had both my parents in my life, my dad and my mom. They're divorced, but I still had them in my life. I grew up with never having to struggle about being in poverty. You know what I mean? And I went into high school. Like, everyone has something that they struggle with, some needs that didn't get met. You know what I mean? So it's not like I had this perfect, idealized childhood. But, as far as high school goes, like, I was a 4.0 student. I graduated as a valedictorian. I was president of clubs. I did sports. Like, I was very involved in school. I didn't have to work at all in high school because my parents made enough money. They said, just go to school, focus on getting, good grades, on being involved, on getting into college. So, I had this extra time where I could go and I could join extracurriculars. I could go and build my resume. My parents made money, so I could go and get tutored if I was struggling with a class. They weren't working crazy hours, so they could drop me off at events. They could pick me up. I didn't have to take the bus. Like, I had all these things that assisted me in my success, right? And then I told him, like, what about somebody who's born like in inner city Detroit or something, right? And they have one parent who is poverty stricken, and they have to work one or maybe two jobs in high school so that they can help their parent make rent or take care of their little siblings, right? So that means, they don't have the free time that I had. They don't have that time after school to go and be a part of a sports team and get that scholarship. And they don't have the means to go. And it's not because they're lazy. They're working just as hard as I am. They're just putting their energy into a different area of life. Because, my needs were met financially. Their needs are not being met financially. So they take that burden on as a teenager. You know what I mean? And then maybe because they have to go and work this job that is keeping them for long hours or whatever, that means they don't have time to study and do school, because it's do I want an A, or do I want to make sure that my mom and my siblings can eat tonight? You know what I mean? So then they don't have the grades, they don't have a strong resume, which means they don't qualify for scholarships, which means they can't get into college because they can't afford it. And it's like stuff like that. I can't, I just don't like that we get sucked into this mentality that everybody deserves what they get. You know what I mean? If you really wanted to be where I am, you could be where I am. And the fact that you're not there means that you haven't made the right decisions. I just vehemently disagree with that. You know what I mean? Because the world is just fucking not fair. Like, some people are just dealt a shitty hand. And it doesn't mean that you can't get out of it, but it's also like, if all this person knows is this life, right? Like, if all they know is struggle, if they don't have some sort of role model in their life, or if all they know is violence, if all they know is this gang, like, how can we expect people to supersede their environment? Like, there has to be, I just feel like there has to be something that intersects their path and says it doesn't have to be like this. If somebody doesn't have that, how do they get out of that? You know what I mean? And you probably get the kids that don't have anything to intersect their path. So they're coming to you with these severe problems because maybe they never knew love. Maybe they never knew security. So with kids that you're dealing with, like the ones that you deal with, how do you break that? You know what I mean? Like, that's probably a bigger question than you can answer because it's systematic, right? But I just think, like, you have to invest more in their communities. That's what I feel like, because it's a whole cycle, like a whole system. You know what I mean? So I get what you're saying, where it's like, and I agree with it. Like, let's change the hustle, right? Like, don't make your money doing drugs, or don't make your money, pimping, or don't make your money doing whatever. Make your money in this way. But how do you get them to do that if that's all they've ever known? You know what I mean? Like, how do you break the cycle? How do you get them to change that?
Educate. We look at um, recidivism, with youth in general going back and forth into the facility. And it's, like you said, it's you having the chance to go left or go right, and I went left. Because I wasn't aware what was over there on the right. And that comes by example. What am I seeing every day on TV? What music am I listening to? And I think as far as for not only educating yourself about what you can right then and there, it's just learning about your past. I talk about, as far as myself, is being affectionate, and so me and one of my buddies, we go back and forth on older music, late 70s, early 80s. What were they talking about in the songs? I teased my grandpa one time because I called and I was like, you didn't have no game back then. All you did was just put on a record and let it go, because everything in that record, what they were saying, you let her listen to it, and they were basically telling you how the night was going to go. And so that's kind of that simple guidance. And so we don't have a lot of that in poverty-stricken areas, or even some of those areas that you might have came from. And I think that just goes on to, people are going to do whatever they want to do. They're going to make whatever decisions, whether they grew up in a lavish home, had both parents, siblings, family, and they get of a certain age and become an alcoholic, or, something that their family wouldn't approve of or wasn't. So we look at that good example. How did they turn to not being that good example? And that just goes to show that people are going to do what they're going to do. And people struggle with different things. Yeah, both of my parents graduated from Harvard. But I want to go to where, probably not even go to college at all. Well, why? We want you to go. We got money set aside for you to go, and you're going to go. And we hear that all the time. I'm going to do, or you're going to do what I tell you to do. And so some of our youth don't get that. And in the state that I live in, religion is pretty pretty big in that state. And so you hear people all the time about this kid committed suicide. Well, what's the reasoning behind that? Is it something that they were struggling with? Was it pressure? Or environment? Because they call it the Bible Belt or whatever the case may be. So in higher elevations, youth or people in general are more prone to being suicidal. And so, you see more LGBTQ plus youth committing suicide. Why is that? Well, because mom and dad are so-and-so, or people that they're around are this and that, and they don't want to be that. They want to be something different. And so when it comes to youth in general, not even African Americans, but just youth that come into the facility, you sit there and sympathize with them. Like, whoa, what's up? And so I tell a kid all the time, no matter what they're struggling with, situation doesn't matter. Well, what are your options? Well, I only got A and B. Well, when A and B don't work, then what? You fold. As stupid as it might sound, get as many weird and most complex solutions or ideas you can come up with. Then you can kind of pick and choose what didn't work, what worked, what was the solution, and kind of penny pinch off each one if they didn't work. And then when you do get to that point of when it worked, then you'll have a better outcome. And so, I tell them all the time, I didn't grow up that way, but I got to where I am based on the direction that I went in. Did I have everything? No. And so I just think that just comes of what we're looking at, where we're trying to go, what's our vision, what's our purpose. I might not know my purpose, and I'm about to be 30. And kids that are 15, 16, 17, or even younger, they try to figure out, well, I live in a shitty situation. So then that's when some of them commit suicide, or they make wrong decisions because they think that if they didn't have certain things right then and there, or they was in that city situation for years, that was my time. And so not knowing your purpose and just, I just think it's learning from example. If you have it. If you don't have it, then you have to find different avenues on how you can be successful. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have that, then it's kind of an ongoing cycle. And that's the thing, peer pressure. It's cool. When was it cool to not be a high school graduate? I get you got to have a part-time job, to help mom and dad. I get it. And so what avenues are you going to take to try to do both? Do you go online? So when you get home or when you're whatever, you have that chance to do your work. There's different options on different certain situations. So as long as you try to get it, and you just have to, it's all work. It's all work.
Yeah. Life is work in general, no matter who you are. Mm-hmm. So you think basically education and a sense of purpose are like the two biggest things in breaking that cycle?
I think so.
Yeah. It adds up to me.
Yeah.
To me, it's just about feasibility. Like how, I agree, but how are we going to get that into those communities? You know what I mean? People like you're doing stuff like that. You're providing resources. You're providing outlets. I just think that there just needs to be more of an investment into the community. You know what I mean? I think that it starts, if you start working on the preventative side of things, right? Like giving people education and a sense of purpose from a young age, especially to people that really need it, who aren't getting it at home, or just have this really cynical negative, scared view of life because of what they've seen at a young age. Those people especially need it. So if you can get ahead of it and give them that education and give them that sense of purpose, then I think you start to alleviate the crime, the involvement in drugs, in whatever it is, like the dirty forms of money. You know what I mean? So I think it's a systematic thing. I just think that it needs to be pushed more on a national level. You know, there just needs to be more reform, and I just don't think it's high enough on people's agenda because people can't make the connection between, oh, if we invest in mental health, right? If we invest in the youth in this way, in education and mental health, it changes everything. You know what I mean? Because we're a very profit driven country, right? So it's about money, it's about work, it's about a return on the investment. This is an investment. I just feel like for some reason, the country, well, I can't say the country because I can't speak on behalf of 300 and however many million people, but to me, it's just mind boggling that it hasn't been done yet. Like, there hasn't been more of an investment into programs like this and communities like this. But yeah, hopefully in the next few years, you know what I mean?
If it ain't a dollar, it don't make sense. And so, I mean, you can argue with it, but there are certain things that happen within our community, state, national government. Some stuff just won't change. And so, like I said, we are a country of profit. So if I can't make money off of it, then why try? Yeah. We think about all the youth in our communities. Well, some of us say, oh man, I'm scared about this next generation that's coming up because why? Well, we're not educating them. We're not showing them different tools on mental health. And so when we're not investing in certain situations, then of course they're not going to be, we won't be a stronger nation just because we have lack of resources for those ones that are coming up.
Right. So you mentioned that you work in Utah. So I'm guessing that that's like a predominantly white community, right? Like especially St. George, and given like the religious nature of that area. How is it for you working there? Like, do you feel out of place or do you feel like you're welcome? Like, do you run into racist people or like racist youth even? Or are you happy there?
I kind of adapt wherever I'm at. And so coming from a small town in Mississippi, I mean, of course you're going to get, the non-interracial dating, or you're going to get those, racist people. They might not say it out loud, but it's been said somewhere. And so I've never had the chance to actually have that said to me in any way. So, and I'm not just going to, let somebody just say what they want to say and let it be offensive. And so coming to Utah is kind of like the same thing. You kind of fit in whatever you're doing. And so I do a lot of things in the community. And so I guess you can say a lot of people know who I am as far as from a youth standpoint. And so as far as being, running into racist people or being uncomfortable, I just kind of do my own thing. And, I don't treat anybody different as far as race or anything like that because, I mean, anybody can be ignorant, whether it's in your own community, whether, we're both African Americans or whatever, anybody can be ignorant. So I just think I accept everybody until you give me a reason not to accept you. Mm-hmm. And so I still see, people riding down the street with their Trump flags on their truck or whatever the case may be. And I don't, have a problem with that. If you really want to continue to be down that path, then that's on you. Okay, but I'm gonna continue to go forward. As far as politics, I don't really get into that. Studied it enough, and politics are never going to change. You won't be able to please everybody. So, as far as that statement of being accepting, I think it's different for me, and so that I don't have to necessarily answer to somebody when it comes to myself. I don't have to necessarily go through those curves of races or whatever case. But I can't speak that for the younger generation. And personal experience, my nephew kind of struggled with that his end of junior year, senior year, with certain people saying this or certain people saying that. So, yeah, it's around. It might not be to the point to where it's back where it was during the KKK or early 1900s, but it's around. And so knowing that it's around in his age group, because he just graduated high school, I just think people are going to say what they're going to say, do what they want to do, but it's how you respond. So words can only go so far. And I tell kids all the time, well, he said this, and but did he hit you? Did he get into your space? Anything like? Well, no. Well, us being adults, we can't just say, oh, well, I don't like the shirt that you're wearing, and you just bum rush me. It don't work like that. So, yeah, I just think you need to be able to be a little bit open as far as bringing culture to wherever you are. And there is more African American people that are moving to Southern Utah, and being able to see people in the community of that same color, hey, where you from? Or let's try to get together and do things that we did back where we were in our communities, such as playing cards or dominoes, something simple to where we can have that connectivity within each other. Mm-hmm. And if I have Caucasian friends that I hang out with, if they want to learn to do certain stuff from my culture, then I can bring that. So just being culturally open, learning different things, that's another thing that will kind of prepare you for whatever environment that you're in as far as ethnicity.
When you say culturally open, you mean for you, like you have to be culturally open, or are you talking about like people that are not black?
People that in general.
Right.
In Southern Utah, there's some African Americans, there's some Polynesians, Caucasians, Hispanics, and they all have their different type of cultures. And so, coming from the South and coming to Utah, I didn't know what I thought that everybody that were like The Rock. I thought he was Hawaiian. Everybody's Hawaiian because you don't know much about Samoa or Fiji or Tonga because you don't see much of that wherever you are. So you have to be able to educate yourself culturally to know what they're into, certain foods that they eat. And I'm a foodie, so I like to try different stuff as far as that. So it's a good thing, because you're adding more tools to your toolbox, and so to try to help somebody of need that may not be the same ethnicity as you, there's always you have a purpose somewhere. If it's not in the same realm of what you do every day, day in and day out, it might be somewhere different. So
yeah, kind of like I just feel like anybody who's around multiple different cultures, like more of like a melting pot, it helps blur the lines. You know what I mean? Which I don't necessarily think that the line should be completely blurred and we should be just looked at as it's idealistic to assume that we can be looked at entirely as exactly the same because we are different, right? Like there's pride in different cultures, and I don't think that we should not see any differences at all. But I think that it's about how you view those differences, like as an asset or as an obstacle. You know what I mean? And I think being around different cultures helps frame people's minds to see those as assets. You know what I mean? Um, so, kind of on another note, has COVID affected the amount of clients you're seeing or the type of issues they're dealing with? I know that personally for me, I'm feeling like the effects of it later. It's like delayed for me. So being locked up and dealing with all that stuff, I feel like hit me this year, like more towards the beginning of the year. And there's so hard to get in to see a therapist right now. Like I've been emailing people and it's like, oh, well, I have a wait list for 10 weeks, or oh, I can't get you in until October. It's like, well, shit, I'm going to either have my mental breakdown by then or have it figured out myself. You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm not interested. Thank you, though. So do you feel like it's affected your workplace, like in terms of what the clients are talking about, like what they're dealing with, or like an increase in people who are struggling?
Yeah. I mean, there were a raise in percentage of youth that came in um, from abuse,
Mm,
um, domestic violence. And that was because, well, usually mom or dad are at work or I'm at school. And when certain things are kind of not there when nobody's at home or not at home as much. But when that changes, certain things start to come out. And like most people said, well, either during a pandemic, you're either pregnant or divorced. And so I think, as far as from that perspective on having different youth come in because of abuse, you kind of start to see, well, there had to been past issues about certain things that had that happen. And so, um, yeah, maybe crime wasn't necessarily up amongst youth, maybe, um, but eventually they start to get bored, and then that's when you start to get destructive. And so, um, there was a little bit of a knockdown as far as youth in the facility, but in general, kids that came into like actual shelter, um, a lot of it was from abuse and in the home. So um, I just think that we're not built as a society to sit inside or not be able to conversate amongst each other face to face. And I think FaceTime and all that stuff only goes a certain amount before you need that full
face to face.
human
Yeah.
interaction. So, yeah, it was nice to be at home, and thankfully I was able to work from home. But not everybody had that chance, and
Mm-hmm.
so um, that's just a whole different thing in itself. To where, yeah, we had stimulus checks and all these different um, services for people that needed it, but what did it do to us mentally? And so for me, it was, trying to do everything I can to be active. If I didn't have a gym to go to, or I had a buddy of mine, him and his brother, we're on FaceTime doing various workouts just to feel like we needed to do something. And that affected a lot of people because, some people are still nervous to even still get out amongst the community because of certain health reasons. Or you have your verses with the whole vaccine thing. So, as far as from a youth standpoint, I think that it it did hurt them mentally to not be able to get out and be around their friends as far as school. But especially coming into the facility, the abuse amongst the home.
I heard a lot about like there being increases in cases of abuse, addiction, like people that were struggling with addiction. You know, if you're constantly home, you have access to that stuff, whereas you don't when you're at work. Suicide, stuff like that. You know what I mean? I just, not even just as a society are we not made to be confined like that, but just as humans in general. You know what I mean? We're social beings, we're tribal beings. So when it's just like being locked up like that, there's just so many needs that I feel like are not being met. You know what I mean? And there was so many, you know, not to minimize the effects of the pandemic at all. Like we lost a lot of people to COVID and things like that. But there were just, there's so many costs outside of the death toll that we're going to be feeling, I feel like, for years to come. You know what I mean? It's just in terms of, you know, there's not enough fucking rental cars. Like people can't get rental cars. They can't buy cars. It's hard to get a house or to move in anywhere right now. The mental health effects of that, you know what I mean? Like the relationships that either started just because people were spending a lot of time around each other, or that deteriorated because they were spending too much time around each other. Anxiety, depression, you know, like we were talking about, addiction, abuse, suicide, so many different things that I feel like if your general population is not well mentally, right, which there's no way to really know where your overall mental health as a country is, I guess, right? It's hard to measure that. But when you have something like that pandemic where you're throwing everybody into an unnatural situation, unless you are like super introverted and don't really go out anyways, and your life wasn't that dramatically affected, I feel like the majority of people were probably greatly impacted mental health wise because of what happened. So, and not, like we have been saying, not everybody is going to take the necessary steps to recover their mental health. You know what I mean? Maybe for some people it's just opening back up or going back to normal. But, you know, I know that, like for me, for example, I feel like I developed a panic disorder in that time. So, and that's not something that I ever struggled with before. Like a little bit of anxiety here and there. But that's one of those things where now I know the difference between normal anxiety and a disorder, because I'll just be at the gym working out and it's like, oh shit, am I about to have a panic attack right now? Just doing absolutely nothing, just being totally normal, and your fight or flight system kicks in and it's like, all right, well, now I have to go to the bathroom and do breathing techniques just so that I can come out here and finish my workout. Or I'm at the grocery store, or, you know, I'm about to take an order for a guest and I'm like, stop thinking about that. Like, you have to say words right now. You have to interact with this person. So stop freaking out in your head about nothing, literally nothing. You know what I mean? So people who kind of developed new issues, you know, that's going to reverberate across the entire country. Just this whole thing was a fucking shit show. And that was just like a side tangent thing. But, you know, it's just another testament to how we need to take mental health more seriously just in our country. Because I know there's other countries that place more of an emphasis on it than we do. I know that we're kind of catching up and it's more on the agenda now than it has been like in the past. But there's still like a long ways to go, you know. Do you feel that people have sufficient access to mental health care, whether it's people or black males? You know, it's probably harder for even black males to get it in general, but what do you think?
No, that's an easy
No, right.
answer.
Yeah.
I mean, for one, there's no resources or not enough resources. And two, going back on that stigma with, you know, black males, it's a sign of weakness. So yeah, it may be there, but you know, you might be around people that um, don't necessarily view that same viewpoint to when it comes to mental health. So if you're around friends or whatever, you might not want to say that you're going through therapy or you're struggling with this. And for some people that were mentally strong before the pandemic, you're confined now, then you start to feel institutionalized. And that's where a lot of our youth and adults as well, when they spend a certain amount of time in confinement, it messes us up. And there's research amongst that, in general, you know. And certain people have certain habits and things that they do or look forward to. You think about Pavlov's, with the salivating dog. Every time he heard that bell, it was eating time. So when he didn't hear the bell and he knows that he's not going to salivate because there wasn't no food there. So I think for us, when we're trained mentally to do something different to what we're trying to do all the time, for you might have gone to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, then couldn't go at all. Then you're worried about if you're going to get COVID. Then you're worried about, okay, if this happens, or how am I building that? Am I immune to this, anxiety now? Is this just going to be the norm for me now, or is it me getting up out of the box on whatever I was going through at that time? And so, yeah, there's a lack everywhere, especially in poverty-stricken areas. And it doesn't necessarily have to be poverty-stricken. It can be, certain ethnicities don't do certain things. And I probably only know a handful of black men, especially, that have ever even thought about therapy. And so I just think that, showing that vulnerability, we all can be strong in our own way. You still can be head of the household. You still can, do your job, be a father, whatever. But you're going to have times when you struggle with certain things. Some people may struggle with things that were going on in the world with, the whole BLM thing, or politics, or people that might have died in certain situations from COVID or natural disaster. There's everything that we can go through that can get us in that anxiety situation. It's just a matter of how are we dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, is there some piece of advice or, words of wisdom that you could give to either black men or youth or just people in general about their mental health, how to take care of it, how to think of it, treat it, anything like that? Like, what would it be?
The main thing is just doing what fits for you. My therapy might not look like your therapy. For some people, therapy might be working out or music, or doing something that they love. And so, if you don't necessarily have the answer to what you're struggling with, then seek help in whatever way you can. We do have the internet, so there are certain things that you can read to try to figure out certain symptoms or things that you can see on your own. You might have somebody else that might have been observing you for a certain amount of time or know you well enough to where, hey, you're struggling. So I just think that, and helping others just in general, because everybody has a different story. Everybody struggles different. So even in the workplace, you might have somebody that is struggling with something that they might not be or wanting to say in public. And so just, kind of checking in, whether it's with family, friends, coworkers, just checking in, something simple. Hey, how are you? Everything all right? Kind of having a plan. Then that way, certain situations come up, then you kind of know different avenues on how you want to fix it. But like I quoted earlier with Common's book, it's let love have the last word with no matter what you're doing. So, we live in a society today that you're going to have people that don't love this and don't love that. We can't please everybody. So just kind of living within your own means. If you need help, seek it. If you see somebody struggle, try to be that, shoulder to lean on, at times.
Yeah. Lead in with love. I'm a firm believer in that. There's not a lot of things that I have very strong, devout views about, but that is definitely one of them, just because I feel like that's the one thing that people consistently respond well to, is being cared for, being appreciated, being loved, being taken care of. So I always talk about that. I always preach love first before anything else,
And health is wealth.
Health is wealth, yeah.
No matter the age, it don't matter. Take care of yourself mentally, physically, and you'll feel better in some sense. Because some people may struggle with certain stuff mentally that they can fix just by being more active. And so, yeah.
Well, all right, Dre, thank you so much for your time. As always, if anyone would like to continue this conversation, I will have Dre's contact information available on all my social media platforms / accounts. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will see you again in 2 weeks to talk elephants.